These are the most disturbing crimes that happen on kids' shows and cartoons, and as the video goes on, they only get darker. The Power Rangers franchise has been a very important show for many kids all around the world. The different type of Rangers were extremely relatable, so kids could pick out their favorite superhero. And of all the colors, arguably the most central character was the Red Ranger, who was originally played by Rick Medina Jr. His performance was extremely praised, and young viewers saw him as a literal figure of inspiration and heroism. But an abysmal event showed the reality of the actor behind the role. On January 31st, 2015, it had been 2 months since Rick started living with his roommate, Joshua Sutter, in Green Valley, a town in California. But on that day, Joshua stopped being his roommate, not because he moved out, but because he was unalived. It started off as a heated discussion between Joshua and Rick in the kitchen over the topic of Rick's girlfriend, whom we will be calling Lucy. Apparently, the discussion started off due to a simple complaint Joshua had about how Lucy parked her car. She was also present at the time of the argument, and slowly, Joshua's tone and aggressive nature were escalating into yelling and throwing things. To escape from him, Rick and Lucy went and locked themselves in the bathroom, but this wasn't going to stop Joshua, who started breaking the door. It was a regrettable decision since immediately after managing to pry it open, he would get stabbed multiple times by Rick with a sword. And it wasn't just any sword, but one that was a copy of the weapon from the Conan the Barbarian film. Now immediately while Joshua lay bleeding, Rick called 911 and informed them about the events. And Rick was then arrested and put on $1 million bond on February 1st. But the investigators dismissed the charges because he claimed he only poked Joshua in self-defense. But the post-mortem revealed something else. Doctors reported that Joshua was stabbed at least 10 times, and that too very deeply. And there was another inconsistency between Rick's story and the evidence at the scene. The door, which Rick claimed was broken down by Joshua, was actually intact. He lied. Now all this evidence only surfaced because Rachel, Joshua's sister, pushed for an investigation, which led to Rick being arrested again in 2016, and he almost got sentenced to 26 years in prison, but since he accepted a plea deal, he was sentenced to 6 years instead. But while this case could still be argued as being gray, the next one is much darker and far more sinister.
A former child actor will stand trial for murder in a scheme to steal a yacht from a retired couple.
In the later part of 2004, Tom and Jackie Hawks posted an advertisement for the sale of their 55-feet yacht in the newspaper. It was a life-changing decision, since the couple spent much of their married life sailing across the blue ocean. But what forced them to finally anchor themselves to land was the fact that their son was a father now, and the two wanted to settle and spend time with their new grandchild. And for this to happen, they had to find a buyer for their yacht, which they had named Well Deserved. A few weeks later in November, a man contacted them, expressing his wish to buy the boat, but something about this man seemed odd. But eventually, seeing that he was married and had a newborn just like their son, they agreed. But just before finalizing the sale, however, the man asked them for a test drive, and as the boat left with Tom and Jackie, it never returned with them. But to know who this stranger was, we have to go back to a kids show. The show was called Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which premiered on August 28, 1993, and went on to become one of America's top-rated kids television series in just 3 weeks. While many young people went on to act in the series, one particular young person is important to our story. This is John Julius Jacobson, whom we will be calling Skylar De Leon, since that's what he changed his name to later on. Skylar was born in a household that didn't have love or affection. His father was suffering from HIV and dealt with illegal substances, and throughout his childhood, Skylar was treated very harshly by his father, even being punished physically just because a pimple appeared on his face. Now his first actual achievement was when he sought a career in acting and landed a role in the Power Rangers series, but all he was cast as was an extra who wasn't even credited. But throughout his teenage life, Skylar lied to people that he was cast in a major role and not as an extra in the series. Now as the years passed, the abuse got harder to bear, and so Skylar escaped and joined the Marines. But that too was short-lived. He left that too and started roaming aimlessly, and this is when he meets a woman through email. Her name is Jennifer Henderson, and the two connect instantaneously thanks to their similar personalities. Soon they would even get married and give birth to a baby daughter, but they weren't financially stable. Skylar was in debt totaling $87,000 with no job and living in Jennifer's parents' house, and since he wasn't the kind to work a regular job, he decided to turn to crime. He started off with minor robberies, but quickly realized that this was not his forte, as he got arrested and ended up in California's Seal Beach City Jail, leaving Jennifer to take care of their baby daughter. For Jennifer, this was proving to be tiresome, as bills kept mounting up and they submerged in more debt. And this was the point when Skylar realized he had to do something more risky and profitable. And that's when he turned to more violent crimes. Skylar chose his first victim to be John Jarvis, whom he met in prison. One thing many people didn't know about Skylar was his unsettling ability to manipulate people. And it was with this talent that he convinced John about a deal in Mexico and made him bring $50,000. On December 26, 2003, John, Skylar, and Skylar's cousin, Michael, drove to Mexico regarding the fake deal that John thought was real. And the next day, John's body was found at 4 p.m., not breathing anymore. And 2 hours later, Skylar and Michael drive back into the USA with John's car, which was then cleaned off all evidence. But this was just the beginning. Encouraged by success in killing John and stealing his money, he now aimed for bigger crimes. And unfortunately, his eyes fell on the advertisement for the sale of a yacht named Well Deserved. It was Tom Hawk's yacht. Skylar knew that to pull this off, he needed all the help he could get. With Jennifer already on his side, he first contacted his workmate, Alonzo Machian, whom he convinced to participate by luring him with hopes of making a great amount of money. Then Skylar and Alonzo met Tom and Jackie on their yacht in November of 2004. Initially, Tom was rightly very suspicious of this young man, who claimed to have the money to buy such an expensive thing. Sensing this, Skylar decided to use this trump card to gain Tom's trust. This trump card was none other than Jennifer, who was now pregnant with another baby. On their next visit, Skylar reduced Tom's suspicion by introducing Jennifer and their daughter, which led to Tom actually letting down his guard and almost agreeing to the deal. But before the deal was finalized, Skylar wanted a test drive of the yacht. In reality, this test drive was just a pretense to lure Tom and Jackie into the middle of the ocean and steal their yacht. But there was one problem. Tom was a really muscular guy, and Skylar and Alonzo were both really thin and weak. So Skylar contacted a friend who had a much more fitting build and who could help him handle Tom. This friend was John Kennedy Fitzgerald, a former pastor turned gang member. So on the quiet noon of November 15, 2004, Skylar, Alonzo, and John took the Well Deserved for a test drive with Tom and Jackie on the boat. When they were safely far from land, the three overpowered Tom and Jackie and then forced them to sign the documents of the sale. When Tom resisted, John punched him in the face, almost making him unconscious. And after all that was done and the required documents were signed, the three tied Tom and Jackie to an anchor and threw them overboard. Immediately, the yacht returned to its place in the harbor and returned to its previous state by Skylar and Jennifer, who cleaned the interiors with bleach to remove all evidence. It was now their yacht. Now, after a few days, Tom's family actually got worried because there was no information about where they were. Police, after being alerted, then go to the harbor, where Tom and Jackie were last reported seen. And when they board the yacht, they find Skylar and Jennifer instead of Tom and Jackie Hawks. Skylar was immediately taken into custody for questioning. In the interrogation, he fabricated a story that after signing on the documents, Tom and Jackie just drove off in their cars. And to prove this, he even showed the documents that were signed by the couple. Even though the police started believing their story, they had the same doubt Tom had. How did such a young man manage to buy such an expensive yacht? To this question, however, Skylar replied that the money he used to buy the yacht was earned through illegal means, like an armed burglary he committed in 2002. Hearing this, the investigators were convinced, but still decided to do some more digging. And this is when they found something that raised their eyebrows. After going to Tom and Jackie's bank, they were surprised to come to know that just days before, Skylar and Jennifer were seen trying to withdraw money from Tom's bank account. Luckily, the bank manager refused. And on top of this, on the document, Jackie signed her name as Hawks instead of Hawks, which led to even more suspicion. As the police were puzzled with more and more contradictory evidence, they turned to get help from the public by asking if anyone had seen Tom and Jackie's vehicle. And this surprisingly works immediately, as someone called from Mexico saying that they spotted the car. And when the police eventually find the car, it is unfortunately not Tom, but a stranger who says he got his car from Skylar De Leon. And this is where the first domino in Skylar's fate fell. The police immediately arrest Skylar and search his home, only to find the Hawks family camera. From this point on, the police started investigating every claim Skylar made, and this eventually led them to the notary, who actually verified the documents of the purchase of the yacht. She admitted she never saw Tom or Jackie, but only saw Skylar and Alonzo. And after a bit more investigation, Alonzo eventually decided to give up and confess the entire truth in March of 2005. And so in 2006, when Skylar was on trial, he wasn't just being judged for the murder of Tom and Jackie, but also for the murder of the prison friend he betrayed, John Jarvis. Skylar, Jennifer, Alonzo, and John Kennedy would eventually be sentenced for this planned murder, but out of all of them, only Skylar and John would be met with the death penalty in 2009. Since then, Skylar has been on death row, and in 2024, he actually made it to the news again after it was reported that he had undergone a gender-changing surgery and renamed himself to Sofia De Leone. But unlike Skylar, the next man exploited the trust of instead of adults.
Somebody being that nice, you will never figure he would be a...
To young viewers in northern Louisiana during the late 1970s, he was a celebrity who wore a nice suit, hosted games, and smiled at young people on live television. Parents and young viewers adored him, so he became an idol, but the truth behind the character was different. In June 1979, Frank organized a camping trip to Louisiana's Kisatchie National Forest. He invited some small humans between years old, and parents assumed it was safe because Mr. Wonder was the one leading it. You hopefully know what I mean by small humans. I'll be continuing with it the rest of the video. However, this trust didn't last. Soon after the trip, the small humans began telling their parents what Frank had done to them. The complaints were so bad they reached the sheriff's office quickly, and a warrant was signed for his arrest. But when investigators were ready to act, Frank had already disappeared. His wife told the police he left in her car, and that exact vehicle was later found abandoned in Dallas. Authorities believed he escaped to Brazil, and they guessed that this wasn't just a panicked escape, but a pre-planned exit. Mr. Wonder vanished and became a ghost for literally decades. The police had a really hard time figuring out where he went, and there were almost no trails that led to him. This was because over the years, Frank changed his identity by taking a new name, Frank Silas, and moving from state to state. He eventually settled in San Diego during the mid-1980s, and in 1992, he made the new name official and legally became John Sellis. And with this new identity, he returned to the same positions he once held. He surrounded himself with the small humans again. He became a Cub Scout leader, PTA president, and football coach. And he somehow blended perfectly into his new neighborhood and even invited local small humans to his house for swimming lessons. To neighbors, he was warm and approachable, and the fact that he always had small humans around was proof of his good nature. He eventually even built a company called Sellis Enterprises to promote these activities. Just like before, small humans were drawn in, and the pattern was repeated. But unfortunately for him, the investigators never stopped looking. For 37 years, they continued a search for him. They tracked his different names and followed whatever faint trails they could find. And finally, in January 2016, the search ended. US Marshals arrested him at his home in Bonita, California, and charged him with multiple counts of inappropriate contact with small humans. The man who once played Mr. Wonder was no longer hiding. 2 years later, in 2018, Frank pleaded guilty to indecent behavior and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. For small humans, Mr. Wonder had once been a television hero, but for the victims, he was always something else. But now let's move on to the time when a fictional character caused harm to young viewers.
More than 600 suffered from convulsions and vomiting after watching a television cartoon program.
The year was 1997, and a seemingly innocent Pokemon episode unleashed a wave of medical emergencies across Japan. On December 16, 1997, at 6:30 PM, young viewers in Japan sat with excitement in front of their TVs to watch the new episode of Pokemon, because this episode was introducing a brand new Pokemon, Porygon. But what was meant to be its big debut ended up being its final one. In that episode, everything was going good for the first 20 minutes. The viewers were enjoying themselves. But then in the very next part, something happened. In this scene, Ash Pikachu went on to attack a row of missiles, and naturally the scene filled with explosions. But these explosions were animated in a way nobody expected. The animators used a technique called Paka Paka, where bright lights flashed rapidly for a while. They thought it looked spectacular, but instead it turned dangerous. The flashing lights on the screen turned out to be at a perfect frequency that could trigger seizures in a lot of kids. And this is exactly what happened. 685 young people all across Japan started seizing and were rushed to hospitals, with some even falling unconscious, while a few stayed in care for weeks. But this wasn't the end. The news of this incident first appeared 3 hours after the event, but it would be a long time before the actual episode stopped being broadcast. In the coming days, a kind of mass psychosis and fear would spread. They would end in nearly 12,000 young people seizing after watching that episode. The government quickly held an emergency meeting and decided to never broadcast that episode ever again. And as a consequence, Nintendo's shares would fall significantly by 3.2%, while the anime series would go on hiatus for 4 months. This event was so crucial that afterwards, Japan introduced strict new rules for animation. Flashing red lights could only appear 3 times a second, other flashes 5 times a second, and no flashing sequence could last longer than 2 seconds. This was not just random, as immediately after the incident, a research paper confirmed that this was an actual biological event called photosensitive epilepsy. And because of all this, Porygon the Pokemon was blacklisted. People even used the phrase Porygon did nothing wrong as a meme, and once even the official Pokemon Twitter posted this image. But until now, Porygon had barely appeared on screen again. In this case, it was a fictional character that carried the blame. But the next story shows what happens when the human behind a beloved character becomes the villain instead.
The 58-year-old was jailed for 10 months in September after being found guilty of 15 counts of making an indecent photograph of a...
In 2005, Chris Langham was at the peak of his profession. He began his career as the sole British writer of The Muppet Show and went on to win 2 awards from the Writers Guild of America in the 1970s. He even appeared as a guest in one episode after the actual actor couldn't make it in time. This episode surprisingly did good, and from then on, Chris began acting too. In 2006, he then won the BAFTA for Best Comedy Performance in the Thick of It, while his own series Help claimed the BAFTA TV award. But only days later, his name was back in the news, but this time for something deeply disturbing. It all started in the USA when Tom and Janice Reedy, a couple who were operating an illegal adult website from their home, got arrested. This site was called Landslide Productions, and it offered a range of videos and images for people to view and even subscribe to. But this wasn't the problem. Landslide Productions secretly offered paid access to sites that had inappropriate videos and images of small humans. And when the US police came across the site, they even found a list of 75,000 subscribers worldwide who had access to these websites. The police immediately started an operation called the Operation Avalanche, in which the US subscribers of Landslide Productions would be arrested. Apart from these, it also sent a list of 7,200 subscribers who were from the UK to the UK police. And this set off Operation OR, the biggest computer crime investigation in the UK. And one of the names that this operation was set to investigate was Chris himself. In December 2005, the police arrested him and searched his home, where they found these obscene video files featuring these people on his laptop, computer, and external hard drive, which led to his immediate arrest and subsequent trial. But the police just saw the surface of his crimes, as more serious allegations were coming when a female fan, let's call her Wanda, claimed that Chris took her innocence when she was only. This was serious, because if proved to be true, Chris would be guilty of 6 charges of indecent behavior and 2 other charges of indecency. And it was with this uncertainty that Chris stood at trial at Maidstone Trial Court in July 2007. In the hearing, he would first get acquitted from the charges made by Wanda. Chris would admit that he had slept with her, but only when she was an adult, and not before that. Wanda herself wasn't able to produce any definitive proof that what she said was true. And while he got free of these charges, we can't say the same about the next ones. In the second set of charges, Chris was convicted of 15 counts of downloading and possessing level 5 exploitation images and videos, the most extreme category. Regarding this, the prosecution had strong evidence. Forensic computer specialist Christopher Crude reported that he found dozens of folders containing exploitation videos of said audience in Chris' laptop. They were arranged so that the folders were named according to the genre. And when one video was shown in the jury, a member even vomited. For his defense, Chris gave 2 reasons. One, he claimed that he downloaded these videos only as part of research, since he was doing a character named Pedro for a serious help. The second reason he gave was that he experienced this kind of exploitation when he was younger too, and he wished to understand more about what exactly happened to him. But the jury simply didn't believe that, and they only took 3 hours to give a verdict, which was of course guilty. And on the 14th September 2007, Chris was sentenced to 10 months in prison and was denied bail. This next case is not an individual's, but that of a whole corporation.
This man who was like trusted as basically a supervisor of is not safe.
Brandy, an 18-year-old eager to start her acting career, was cast in The Amanda Show, a popular sketch comedy television series that first aired on Nickelodeon in 2002. Her mother, whom we will be calling Martha, wanted to further Brandy's exposure to the acting industry, and Nickelodeon seemed like a promising next step. It was there that Brandy encountered Jason Handy, a production assistant in charge of the actors. Jason's charismatic and youthful appearance naturally led parents to trust him with their small humans, and they would continue doing so if not for a single incident involving Brandy. As Brandy got to know Jason, she became increasingly charmed by his words and actions. Slowly, she began telling Martha that she and Jason were exchanging emails and numbers, and Martha, thinking this was normal, didn't stop this development. But soon she would realize that this was a bad decision, as one day she went into Brandy's room seeing her cry. Not knowing what this was all about, Martha opened Brandy's computer, only to find a very disturbing email from Jason. In that email, Jason didn't have any clothes on and was doing inappropriate things to himself, and he captioned it with, he sent it to her to let her know he was thinking of her. Overcoming the shock from seeing this, Martha strangely contemplated whether to call the police or not, fearing she would be judged as a bad parent because she let her daughter talk to him, and shockingly she decided to not call the police and just leave the matter untouched. Yet in a few years, Jason would be arrested on charges that he committed obscene acts with a small human younger than. And when the police searched his house, they would find heaps of obscene material involving young people in unsettling poses and acts. They also found a ton of photos from girls opposite his house. He also maintained individual Ziploc bags containing things that shouldn't have been stored, such as underwear from somebody else. Due to all this evidence, Jason was then sentenced to 6 years. However, after his release, Jason would be again arrested for behaving indecently with yet another small human, and would be then sentenced to 24 years in prison. But the consequences of his crime didn't end with him. Brandy would sacrifice her career and vanish permanently from the acting scene. And you might think this was just an isolated incident at Nickelodeon, but another employee was about to do something even more disturbing. Brian Peck acted in many roles over the course of his career. It was his job as a dialogue coach that would make him a respectable figure in the television industry. And his journey started with the hit Nickelodeon television series, The Amanda Show. For many young people and their parents, Brian was a reliable mentor who had always worked hard to teach them about acting and dialogue delivery. As a result, many people felt comfortable letting their young people spend time privately with Brian, thinking he was just giving them good advice. One such person was Drake Bell, the actor from the show Drake and Josh. And his father, Joe Bell, was attracted by Brian's celebrity status, especially his work with stars like Leonardo DiCaprio. So Joe trusted Brian with his son, allowing him to act in The Amanda Show. However, Joe soon began noticing some very questionable behaviors. Even the young people noticed some disturbing things. For example, in Brian's house, there was a painting that was sent personally by John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer who was on death row. Still, everyone gave him the benefit of the doubt, but underneath it all, actors like Drake were suffering. It happened one night when Drake was and was sleeping on Brian's couch, when he suddenly woke up and he saw that Brian was on him committing unspeakable things. And when he tried to speak, he was so shaken that he couldn't do anything and just had to surrender to Brian. Episodes like these would keep occurring now and then, until Drake was completely exhausted, mentally and physically. His girlfriend's mother even sent him to therapy, noticing his depressed state, but he simply didn't get better. But finally, the Amanda Show ended, and Drake was relieved he wouldn't have to work with Brian anymore, or so he thought. Soon after, Nickelodeon would finally announce a new show, Drake and Josh, where Brian was cast as Drake's dad. After hearing the news, Drake couldn't help but tell everything to his mother, as the thought of working with Brian again was unbearable. And so they went to the police, who made Drake describe every single detail of what happened. And that is not all. Drake even had to call Brian and secretly make him confess to his crimes. In 2003, Brian was finally arrested for indecent behavior towards small humans. However, many industry celebrities continued to support Brian's innocence. In fact, on the day of his sentencing, his side of the court was filled with Nickelodeon actors and producers. And even after his release from jail after 16 months, Brian immediately found work on the show The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, as if nothing had happened. He was only removed after a few months after his past made him a risk for the show's reputation. And while all of this was happening, Drake's name was kept under wraps, as it was only in 2024 that Drake officially came forward to share what happened to him to the public. But it only gets more disturbing in the next case, because it involves a man who has no regrets for what he had done.
Well, she was too young, and I freely admit that. But she was so convincing.
In March 2018, John Chris Felucci, the creator of the groundbreaking cartoon The Ren and Stimpy Show, was accused of unsettling things by two former artists, Robin Bird and Katie Rice, a story that shook the entire animation industry. John rose to fame in 1991 with the launch of The Ren and Stimpy Show on Nickelodeon, a show due to which his studio, Spimco, became synonymous with a way of animating that was completely out of the box and engaging. The show was the most popular cable program of its time, and his work went on to influence series like SpongeBob SquarePants and Rick and Morty. But as his artistic reputation grew, so did a pattern of troubling behavior behind the scenes. Robin Bird first wrote to John in 1994, when she was just. After that, he began sending her gifts, including art supplies and toys, before flying her to Los Angeles at the age of. It was then that John started showing his true colors by overstepping some boundaries. The following year, before her senior year of high school, Robin alleged that John brought her back to California to live with him as both his intern and his girlfriend. This arrangement, according to her, was an open secret within the studio, and for which Robin had to pay the price, as it gave her PTSD and forced her to leave the animation industry entirely. For Katie too, the experience was similar. She began receiving flirtatious letters from John at the age of. At 18, she then went to work for him at Spimco, and John started sending her work emails begging for a relationship, threatened her, and once waited without clothes for her in the studio. Finally, she quit after John threatened to violently exploit her. Not only this, but Katie also found on his computer what she believed to be inappropriate content, including a certain audience. But things finally came to light in 2018 when BuzzFeed released a report detailing all these allegations, and colleagues confirmed that they heard similar stories. The filmmakers behind Happy Happy Joy Joy, a 2020 documentary on John's work, also said that in speaking with dozens of industry insiders, many described John's disturbing behavior. When confronted with the allegations, John apologized, as if this was just a small issue, and to reduce the blame, he even said that the reason he did all this was because he was mentally ill and unstable. But while his attorney admitted that he had a 16-year-old girlfriend in the 1990s, he said it was a period of emotional instability. But when pressed years later in the documentary to apologize directly to Robin Bird, his response was unsettling. Looking into the camera, he smirked and said,
I'd love to tell Robin in person. If she watches this, give me a call, please.
Bird, who was present at the film screening, replied publicly, "Don't worry, I'm not going to call him." The industry responded very swiftly, as Paramount Network, Cartoon Network, and Adult Swim each issued statements saying they would not work with them again. Nickelodeon, despite being most closely tied to his career, declined to comment, and John himself admitted he was forcibly retired from the industry even though he got more ideas. Legally, nothing came of the allegations. Police told Bird that the alleged crimes were too old to investigate, and the report about finding inappropriate content on John's computer was also dismissed, after police said that they couldn't obtain a warrant. No charges were ever filed, and no lawsuits reached the courts. These humans didn't go as far as to actually unalive people, but the next ones did.
Lelaki itu menjenguk ke dalam dan mendapati jasad Hanizah sudah kaku dan diharungi semut.
Intan Yusniza Mohammed Yunus was only 2 years old when she was already a familiar face on radio, television, Malaysia's kids program Kilap Kanak Kanak Angkasa Puri, broadcast by the country's national channel. She went to the Salak South School in Kuala Lumpur and lived with her foster mother Haniza Ismail. People admired her talent and affectionately called her a little star, but this star's glow would fade on June 22, 1991. That day, a neighbor noticed that even though it was 7 AM, Haniza still hadn't opened her grocery store. So he started calling out her name, and not getting any response, peeped inside, but a scene of horror awaited him there. Inside the house, he could see Haniza's body lying on the floor, and when more people arrived, they eventually got into the house and found Haniza and Intan lying in a pool of blood. Authorities were called, and when they searched the house, they found that some jewelry and cash were missing from the place, so it seemed like a typical case of theft gone wrong, until the authorities found signs that Intan and Haniza were inappropriately violated. Intan had been struck 5 times on the head with a blunt heavy object, and Haniza had suffered 2 blows, one of which had fractured her skull and caused a fatal brain hemorrhage. Upon doing the post-mortem, the doctors declared that Intan and Haniza died between 9:30 PM and 7 AM, but other than that, there was no strong evidence tying this to anybody else. So the police sought the help of the public by offering cash rewards to anyone who presented evidence that could be used to catch the killer, and it worked, as Intan's gold chain was reported at a pawn shop. After investigating further, they found out that the person who pawned it was a neighbor of Intan, Zainuzaman Muhammad, a 24-year-old unemployed addict, and he immediately confessed to murdering Intan and Haniza, all because he had a crush on the small celebrity. But in August 1992, more than a year after the killings, when Zainuzaman was facing trial at the High Court, he insisted that his confession was false, and he only did that because the police were violent with him. But by this time, the authorities already had strong evidence, and the court's dismissal of his confession didn't matter greatly. At the time, Malaysia still had jury trials. Under Section 302 of the Penal Code, if the jury decided he was guilty, the sentence would be death by hanging. The prosecution laid out their evidence. They said Zainuzaman had broken into the terrace house to steal, and when Haniza and Intan slept in the living room, he picked up an iron pipe and struck them both. They presented as evidence a butcher, R. Mihindran, who told the court that Zainuzaman had sold him a gold chain engraved with the name Intan, which was confirmed to belong to her. Another person from the neighborhood, Muhammad Fazli, testified that he'd seen Zainuzaman outside the victim's house at the time of the murders, and he picked them out of a police lineup. Zainuzaman's sentencing was weird, as by a majority of 5-2, the jury acquitted him of the murder of Haniza, but they also said that Zainuzaman admitted he'd broken into the house to steal jewelry, so he might have killed Intan in the meantime. On August 17, 1992, after 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a final verdict. By a majority of 6-1, they found him guilty of murdering year-old Intan Yusniza Mohammed Yunus. The judge agreed with the jury and sentenced him to death by hanging. Zainuzaman showed no reaction when the sentence was read, but behind the surface of this nonchalance was fear of death, as immediately after being sentenced, Zainuzaman appealed to the Court of Appeal, which was rejected, and then took his case to federal court, Malaysia's highest court. And on September 30th, 1997, the court upheld both his convictions and his death sentence. Organizations like the Amnesty International appealed for clemency, but even the King of Malaysia rejected these petitions. And finally, on October 5th, 2001, 10 years after the murders, Zainuzaman was hanged in Kajang prison. He was 34, but the next man who committed a crime took a much darker path.
On a Wednesday morning in July, firemen found Judith and her mother Maria murdered by Judith's father.
Judith Barsi was one of the most recognizable stars of the 1980s. Her career spanned commercials, television shows, and major animated films. Her famous "Yup Yup Yup" line in The Land Before Time made audiences fall in love with her sweet, delicate voice.
Yep, that is what it is. Yep, yep, yep.
Which made it even more heartbreaking when her promising career was cut short by this disturbing event. Judith was born in California in 1978 to Joseph and Maria Barsi, a pair of Hungarian immigrants who fled the 1956 Soviet occupation of their homeland and subsequently settled in the United States. Maria had always dreamed of becoming an actress, but when that didn't happen, she poured her ambitions into Judith. She would teach her daughter ways to walk and pose, even when she was as young as Judith's big break came at a skating rink when a casting director, charmed by her small stature, offered her a life-changing opportunity. He decided to cast her in a commercial for Donald Duck orange juice, and from then on she would become a familiar face to American television watchers by appearing in more than 70 commercials and 10 shows. She soon transitioned to films, appearing in blockbusters like Eye of the Tiger and Jaws 2. And by 4th grade, Judith was earning nearly $100,000 a year. This allowed her family to buy a 3-bedroom house in West Hill, Los Angeles, and live very comfortably. But behind the success was a dark and violent home life. Judith's father, Joseph, was an alcoholic with a history of violence and no job. He'd been arrested 3 times for drunk driving, and his behavior was marked by a growing jealousy and paranoia over his daughter's success. His jealousy manifested as repeated and violent threats. He would tell his neighbors and friends that he would unalive his wife and his daughter and himself. And Judith used to tell her friends how her father threw pots and plates at her when he was drunk. One neighbor even recalled a chilling conversation where Joseph declared he would have to unalive Judith as well to prevent her from suffering if he unalived her mother. But this was not limited to physical behavior and even extended to psychological manipulation. Once when Judith had to go to the Bahamas to shoot her role in the Jaws sequel, Joseph threatened her with a knife, saying he would hurt her if she didn't return home. Joseph was incredibly insecure that his wife and daughter would leave him, so when a relative of Maria died in Hungary, Joseph even hid the message from them so they wouldn't fly to the funeral. However, it wasn't as if no one tried to get help. In 1986, Maria called the police after Joseph turned extremely violent, and the police, after finding no reliable injuries or signs, just left, and Maria decided to not go further since she was scared of what Joseph might do. This situation took a toll on Judith. She showed signs of severe stress, pulling out her own eyebrows and plucking her cat's whiskers. One notable instance was when Judith broke down in front of her agent, Ruth Hansen, before her audition. They took her to a psychologist who, upon meeting with the young actress, identified clear signs of severe psychological and physical. The psychologist reported it to Protective Services, finally sparking an investigation. But that too was dropped, when Maria assured them she would file for divorce. And this she was really going to do, but hesitated at the last moment because she didn't want to leave the house her daughter had worked so hard for. But this decision would turn out to be fatal. On July 25, 1987, Joseph decided to seal the fates of his daughter and wife. That night he entered Judith's bedroom and made her leave this earth. When Maria came to the hallway hearing gunshots, Joseph did the same to her. And this is where it gets darker, as Joseph just roamed in his house for the next 2 days like a ghost, with his wife and daughter lying around. On July 27th, he then poured gasoline all over the house and himself and set everything on fire. It would be hours before a neighbor, Eunice Daly, saw the smoke and called the police. And at the scene of horror, the firefighters would find the entire family. This tragedy shocked the nation. After her death, the animated film All Dogs Go to Heaven honored Judith with a dedication in the end credits. And now we'll move on to cases of online entertainment meant for and how they went incredibly wrong.
A lot of the videos seem to start off as very friendly and then all of a sudden just turn into something very inappropriate.
Since the moment YouTube Kids was created, it has remained a battleground for creators trying to make more money than their competition. And these creators went to extreme lengths to get to watch their videos. And one of the most unsettling ways they try to do so is called Elsagate. To know where the word Elsagate came from, we have to look at a specific channel named Webs and Tiaras. On the surface, everything looks normal. The channel features videos where a man and a woman dress up as Spider-Man and Elsa to perform funny skits. These skits mainly contain kids' level of humor and physical comedy. But that is also when people started noticing some pretty weird things, like the fact that the YouTube channel managed to get 1 billion views in just months after posting their first videos. One theory was that they were using bots to generate views, but nobody could actually prove that. However, people quickly realized a more disturbing tactic they were using, which was to attract young people by showing them things they weren't meant to see. One such video showed Spider-Man being pregnant while Elsa performed a scan on them, and this video got around 17 million views in a very short time. Since they looked normal on the surface, YouTube filters didn't work, and these creators had a chance to produce more such videos, and soon many other channels started doing the same thing. Things would peak around 2017, when some Redditors stumbled across some really gross content. In one video, for example, Elsa went to the bathroom and picked up her waist to smear it on Spider-Man's face, and this was just one of many. Later that year, an independent blogger named Red, Wiped and Blue published a blog where he exposed these channels, and this is the first place on the internet where the word Elsagate was used. This is by far the most dangerous issue I've come across to speak on. What I am about to reveal may put my family and myself in danger of character assassination or worse. I say for the record that it was my hand, mine alone, who harnessed the initiative, intention and willpower to make this go viral. But others had noticed this and posted on this only to have it removed before me. In this blog, he would go on to fully reveal how much money these creators were making by producing this kind of content, and it turned out to be a lot. But there was a much more serious allegation that he made in the blog, which was that channels like Webs and Tiaras are run by international organizations that aim to desensitize small humans to predators. Soon, big news outlets like the BBC started picking up the story, and the effect was immediate. Many big companies like Nestle stopped showing their ads to young people on YouTube. And finally, because of the pressure from parents all around the world, YouTube was forced to terminate all such accounts in 2017. But still, some accounts survived. One such account that threaded a similar path, but which came off as more disturbing, was the channel Toy Freaks. Toy Freaks was run by Gregory Chisholm and his 2 daughters. In his videos, Gregory and his daughters would roleplay scenarios that were supposed to be funny, yet somewhere along the lines, things got out of hand. Gregory was a single father with 2 daughters, so he conceived the idea of creating a YouTube channel that specialized in pranks. But the pranks Gregory came up with were just cruel and outright disturbing. In some videos, the content got really alarming, like the video where Gregory places a pacifier in his mouth and acts like an infant with his 2 daughters. Another video featured his daughters in a bathtub while he threw a frog into it, and when a daughter started crying, all he did was laugh and record her reaction. On top of that, Gregory seemed to have no hesitation in showing his daughters in swimsuits to strangers online. And since people really love to watch such content, his channel grew almost instantly to around 8 million subscribers. But this was stopped thanks to James Bridle, a Greek artist, who first pointed out this channel as disturbing in his Medium blog. Toy Freaks specializes in gross out situations and activities which many viewers feel border on and exploitation, if not cross the line entirely, including people vomiting and in pain. Toy Freaks is a YouTube verified channel, whatever that means. The fact that Gregory was producing such content was bad in itself, and on top of that, he was doing so with his own daughters. So YouTube was finally forced to terminate his channel. But this time YouTube went even further, as it also contacted the National Center for Missing and Exploited Small Humans, which in turn contacted the Illinois Police Department to investigate Gregory. Now, Gregory never got charged, but there was an even worse channel out there.
Parents behind the popular YouTube channel Daddy05 say they thought they were playing innocent pranks on their but instead they're sparking outrage and accusations of
When Mike Martin first started posting videos in 2015, he wanted attention, so he created the YouTube channel Daddy05, and it quickly pulled in an audience. At first it seemed like an ordinary family vlog, but over time the videos began to change. They were no longer about fun family activities or sweet moments. They were about pranks, which kept getting crueler as time went by. Mike's family was a large one. He, Mike, lived with his second wife Heather, and together they raised 5 kids. 3 were Heather's from an earlier relationship, and 2, Emma and Cody, were Mike's biological children from his first marriage. And these 5 young people became the heart of the channel. The usual videos posted there were pranks, whose victims were the children of the family. Cody and Emma quickly stood out, but not for good reasons. Viewers noticed that Cody was often targeted, humiliated, and made to cry while everyone else laughed. And what the viewers saw went far beyond jokes. In one infamous video, Heather scattered invisible ink on the carpet and then screamed at Cody, demanding to know why he made a mess. He sobbed and pleaded, saying that he didn't do it. And this only made Mike and Heather scream louder. It was a painful watch for many. In another video, Mike instructed his son Alex to slap his sister Emma when she lost the game. The slap left Emma in tears. In yet another video, Cody was pushed into a bookcase hard enough to leave a bruise. These clips stayed online for millions of people to see, and for Mike, this meant more virality and money. But even he and Heather knew he might get into trouble, so he usually insisted that all of this was staged. They said that the kids were acting and that the tears were part of the show.
Some stuff was acted out, scripted.
But to anyone watching, the fear on the young actors' faces looked real. In fact, a psychologist who watched these videos described the behavior as abusive, and this was just one of the many criticisms hurled against the channel in 2017. At first, however, Mike neglected it. He claimed people were overreacting and that they just didn't get the humor behind the videos.
A lot of people don't see the humor in it.
But then the story broke out on YouTube. On April 17, 2017, YouTuber Philip DeFranco released a video compiling clips from Daddy of 5 and questioning whether the small humans were being treated badly. This video went viral, and suddenly the Martins weren't just a YouTube controversy, but a national story. Newspapers like the Washington Post and the Guardian started reporting it, and all the headlines asked the same question: when does a prank go too far? Even though nothing was decided, the channel started facing backlash in the form of sponsors canceling the contract and other YouTubers calling them out. And on April 22nd, Mike and Heather posted a video titled Daddy of 5's Apology. The couple sat together, looking shaken, and admitted that they made terrible parenting decisions.
We realized that we have made some terrible parenting decisions.
The apology ended, but the internet didn't forgive. The videos were already archived, and people who viewed them only got more furious. And behind the scenes, the situation was even worse. Cody and Emma's biological mother, Rose Hall, saw the clips and went to court, arguing that her children weren't safe in Martin's home. Protective services got involved, and within days an emergency hearing was held, and the results were fast. Cody and Emma were removed from Mike and Heather's custody and placed with Rose. For the Martins, the empire they had built on YouTube collapsed almost overnight. The apology couldn't undo years of footage, but while here it was limited to pranks, in the next one the people involved had to see worse.
I initially read the story. I'm not gonna lie, I was sick to my stomach.
In 2019, a worried girl contacted the Maricopa Police Department, and the fact that she would go on to reveal about her own mother significantly changed how people viewed young people-oriented content on YouTube. Michelle Hackney Hobson was a resident of Arizona who actively participated in the foster care and adoption system. Even though she had 4 biological kids, Michelle still went on fostering young people in her house. This made Michelle a respectable figure in the community, and the praise for her only increased when she legally adopted 7 between the ages of and years old. It can be said that it was the financial pressure in handling such a household that forced Michelle to start the YouTube channel Fantastic Adventures, in which she posted skits that were primarily intended for. In those skits, she cast her 7 adopted as characters who fought evil babysitters and villains. The content, while simple, was also effective, as it quickly gained millions of views in little time. To outsiders, this was the most suitable and wholesome content they could watch. But what the viewers couldn't see was the dark lives of the small humans in the videos. First of all, Michelle didn't allow any of her to attend an actual school, and all of their social interactions were limited to their family. This was because Michelle strongly believed that school and other activities would mean that they would have less time for shooting videos, so she mostly just homeschooled them. But that was also a lie, since there was neither homework nor lessons. The had to dedicate their whole time to these YouTube videos. Through this method, it was guaranteed that she would keep an eye on them continuously and also make money through YouTube. She would also subject them to atrocious punishments for the sake of the videos, and they had to follow a very strict schedule, any deviation from which resulted in either being starved or some kind of punishment which literally injured the small humans. And it wasn't like everything was covered up perfectly, because sometimes other people got a glimpse of what was happening. Early in 2011, a year before the channel's start, someone from the neighborhood reported that Michelle would lock the foster young people in a dark room where they would yell and cry. This was the so-called green room, which Michelle specifically intended for young people who didn't perform well in the YouTube videos. She would lock them in this windowless room for days without any clothes. But when the Department of Safety arrived after being contacted by someone unknown, they found no evidence of any maltreatment and left. After which they would arrive again 2 days later due to a complaint that their first search was inadequate. But even the second time, the search would reveal nothing. Over the years, visits like these became frequent and all ended in the same way. On one occasion, a DCS investigation was started when small humans who were in Michelle's foster care showed up to their daycare with red skin and human waste in the creases of their skin. Another time, a school teacher complained that her foster came to school with small shoes and gunk on their teeth. To this allegation, the DCS caseworker apparently laughed and dismissed it, even though there were more than 9 such visits. DCS always dismissed the allegations, which made this even more depressing. However, Michelle wasn't the only one running the horrible household. She took help from her biological sons, Logan and Ryan, who acted like her henchmen in making sure that every young person followed the rules. But the 2 brothers descended further into depravity by committing unspeakable acts with the small humans. But unlike these two brothers, Michelle's other biological child, Megan, was the one who put an end to her mother's brutality. In March of 2019, Megan was ordered by Michelle to take one of the siblings, whose name was Stacy, to the dentist since her teeth were rotting, most possibly due to Michelle's lack of care. And while returning to the doctor, the sister told Megan everything she could about what was happening in the house. Megan was shocked. It wasn't like she didn't know about the channel, she just didn't know the full extent of insanity that was going on in the house. Since Michelle's biological daughter, Megan, and Jordan moved out of the house long ago. After hearing the true extent of the torture from Stacy, Megan knew that this wasn't something to be ignored, so she decided to act. On March 13, 2019, Megan recorded Stacy's description about what Michelle did to her and the other little ones on a daily basis, and went with Jordan to meet a police officer outside the Maricopa Police Department. Hearing the awful description, the officers immediately went to Michelle's home to do a welfare check. The door was opened by Ryan, who casually agreed for the cops to look around the house. The reaction wasn't surprising, since visits by the DCS were frequent. It was different this time, however. The cops questioned the little human separately, while Michelle and Ryan were confined to the top floor. All the while, Michelle acted reckless, because she knew that the police were a lot more serious this time, because she'd guessed that it was Megan and Jordan who contacted the police. So she tried to make it seem like they were angry at her and just wanted to take revenge. But the police weren't going to buy that. One officer found Stacy crying in the pantry and asked her how she was. While she hesitated to speak in the beginning, slowly she started revealing more details about the physical torture, out of which the most cruel one was how Michelle had used 2 bottles of pepper spray on Stacy, alongside other disturbing things.
You know that spray that you use when there's like bad people and stuff? Pepper spray? Yeah. Emptied 2 of those bottles on me.
Another officer noticed how most of the young people were malnourished and unwashed. One girl even admitted that Michelle usually starved them for a week or more. And finally, after checking on all the young people, the police managed to get a search warrant. Soon, even the arrest warrant followed, and the police took Michelle, Brian, and Logan into custody. After a bit more investigation, Michelle would be jailed, but she wouldn't face any legal consequences since she would die before being sentenced. The reason for her death was reported to be a bleed in the brain, hence the court dismissed the charges. Even Ryan and Logan's charges were dismissed, but in 2025, Logan would be arrested and sentenced to 2.5 years of jail for physically violating the little humans once again.